So, Amelia, I was just saying off air that this is generally one of the most interesting times I've researched for a show. There's so much good content on your page that there's almost too many topics to get through, and knowing me, we'll go off on too many tangents. I'll cover about a third of them. But before going into health, nutrition, reverse dieting, all the stuff that you're particularly known for, I came across you for the first time watching one of my favorite trash TV shows, First Dates. And I remember years past, and I all of a sudden someone recommended your page. I followed you and went, where do I know that girl from? And then I stumbled across, on YouTube, a recommended video. Like, okay, I recognize her now. And I had a Richie Neville from the boy band 5 on a few weeks ago, and we're talking about behind the scenes of some of these stuff. And I just have to ask, what is it like being on the show? Is it portrayed how it comes across, or is it a totally different experience?
It was great, to be fair. So I actually filmed it in 2000 and I think it was 2018. It didn't air until 2020 or 2021 or something like that. So for me watching it was really uncomfortable because a lot has changed in 3 years, obviously. But it very much like what it is like. It's not staged at all. So of course they edit accordingly. They edit what they want to edit, of course, like any TV show, right? But they can't edit what you don't say. They can't just make it. So it's pretty real. The actual running of it, because I was on First Dates Hotel, is great. They are kind, they are caring, and there were a couple of backstage kind of meltdowns, not by me surprisingly, but by other people that were on at the same time as me. And I know that they were super, super supportive. Nice vibe, great food, great drinks. Everyone, it's exactly what you think it is. I genuinely think it was a great experience for me, even though when it came out I was kind of uncomfortable and I almost didn't want it to come out because it had been so long and my life had changed so much, and I physically and mentally had changed so much. I felt a little bit uncomfortable watching it back, but that's a kind of choice you make when you go onto these types of programs.
I remember I did a show with the BBC talking about is red meat bad for you? Sort of approach, and I came on thinking that getting the personal trainer, I hate using the word expert because it's relative to who, but I remember going on that show and getting absolutely edited like crazy to fit the narrative of the show, and obviously this seems like it's a little bit more friendly. But I remember you saying on the clip, because I actually hunted this clip out to watch it again before I
God.
And I remember you saying that you found dating scarier than your PhD. Was it that scary doing that on TV?
Yeah, I was terrified. But I think what people don't know, for me, in my job, you wouldn't know that I was introverted and really quite shy. And I've had to do a lot of work on trying to be more confident, or just acting more confident to speak to people, etc. Because I love my job. So those are things that I have to work on to be good at my job, right? So but naturally, when I'm in an environment one-on-one, I find that quite daunting. And dating, of course, requires you to be A, vulnerable, and B, in a one-on-one environment. And in that situation, people watching at the same time. Yeah, it's quite, it's terrifying. I don't find it so much terrifying now, but I still I don't know what your situation is, but I don't like going into dating ever. I still always feel uncomfortable. I still always feel nervous.
I hate it. I've been with my fiance now, 8 years gone, that's flown by. And I remember I was so nervous when I did my first date with her that I thought, right, I'm sorry, I need to look good. I found the best pair of chinos I can fit in my wardrobe. I hadn't worn chinos at that point for about 3 years prior. Didn't realize until I got out of the house that these didn't fit. So I'm there literally waddling away, not confident in my shirt. I buy a shirt, so I'm coming in waddling with my old shirt in a bag and my current shirt on me. And I hated it. I'm all right chatting, like an environment like this, like a podcast, having a good conversation, I can chat. But when you have pressure, especially when the ability to flirt, that's never something that came naturally to me. I just struggle with it immensely. I'm so glad that I, touch wood, never, ever, ever have to do that again.
I'm so jealous. No, I'm not. I love being single, but it is, it's just a very, very, very vulnerable thing to do, because what you're doing is in these situations, you could be judging me right now, but you're judging me for kind of what's coming out of my mouth and my knowledge, really. Whereas in a situation where you're dating someone, they're judging you for the way that you look, the way that you sound, how funny you are, how smart you are. As a woman, you want to be smart, but you don't want to be too smart because you don't want to be intimidating, but you want to be confident and not, and it's just, those are the things that go around in your head, especially as a woman who is quite self-sufficient, that goes kind of maybe against some cultural norms when it comes to dating. It can be quite difficult to go into that situation. Right, I'm probably quite weird. I'm probably maybe not what a man would necessarily think that they want in a partner because of my job and things like that. And so you already feel like, I don't know, it's a confidence thing for sure, but it's daunting. Whereas like you in this environment.
Intimidation, do you think it's an intimidation factor becoming someone that's strong, trains, is a doctor? So there's a level of gravitas, let's say, there. Do you find that sometimes makes it a more of a daunting experience?
Yeah, but I don't mean it in a conceited way. I am just quite vocal about the fact that I don't necessarily need, in a traditional sense, need a partner. I would like a partner, but I don't need. So I think that can be quite challenging for someone to accept from the get-go, I think. And I've had feedback that it is quite intimidating a little bit. And I'm also a raging feminist. You just have, like, if you follow me on Instagram, at some point you'll see that I'm a raging feminist. And again, that's intimidating. I'm quite opinionated. So I think it's not me personally. It's just like, yeah, my chat can be quite intimidating, maybe, until you get to know me and realize that I'm actually quite shy and kind of pathetic.
I think though, like, to give you a compliment right off the bat, like, it's very clear that you're a feminist from the social media content, but there's feminism and there's feminism. And I think when I look at, without making this a feminist podcast, because this can go off on a huge amounts of tangents, but if you ever see any of my content on Instagram, I'm very sort of men's rights, men's health, confidence, physical, everything else. And like, your content doesn't come across in this raging, intimidating feminism. It's very fair, it's very open, it's in my eyes true equality, rather than trying to, how do I say this respectfully, but just sort of like, without trying to sort of like make up for lost time and pushing agenda. So okay, everyone should be on a level playing field. I think I don't find it, for me, maybe it's just me knowing your content, knowing what you do, don't find it an intimidating thing.
Well, that's good. I'm glad. Do you know what, the one time that I've been banned from Instagram was because I put up a post that said, men are trash, why I hate this narrative. And I spoke about it from a feminist perspective about why that's a really unhelpful narrative. And Instagram took it down for hate speech and banned me. It's a sad time.
It's interesting going into you saying about like being sort of like unconfident social situation, almost someone's having to teach yourself to be confident socially for your job. And it's interesting you say this, because having done 70, 80 episodes of this now, you think personal trainers, fitness industry people portray a level of confidence. And I got Pat Davidson on the show, a few months ago, who comes across very outspoken and very confident. And the whole episode was about his struggles in social interaction. And do you find, because I know you work with a lot of coaches and things like this, do you find that this is actually a trend that there is often coaches are coming from a place, why they probably went into the gym, come from a place of insecurity and a lack of confidence? And what did you do to start to rectify it in your own case?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things with coaches. I work with coaches who, probably like you, really just want to do their best and are always striving to do more. And there's a lack of confidence just because there's the imposter syndrome of not feeling like they're worthy of their job and not feeling like they've done enough, and maybe that luck has brought them. So there's the imposter syndrome side that impacts their confidence and speaking up about what they know and putting themselves out there on social media, etc. But then a lot of people who go into work on support people with their relationship with food have often had issues with their relationship in the past too, and so that adds to their imposter syndrome. But also sometimes that can come alongside a lack of confidence or some insecurities, and so that also like kind of manifests in a lack of confidence. So one of the jobs that I do with Emma Story Gordon is we actually run EIQ Nutrition, which is a personal trainer course, and one of the main values of that business is helping people improve their confidence so that the good coaches can actually get out there, because most of the time the outspoken ones are not necessarily the best ones. Again, I'm generalizing, not all men, women, whatever, coaches. So yeah, I definitely see it a lot, and I work with coaches like on my coaching team too that a lot of our work is improving their confidence. For me, I just forced myself into difficult situations because I did my undergraduate degree in sports biomedicine. I was top of my class, but I got into such a state with lack of confidence that I got a 2-1, and I was about, I think they said I was something like 0.3% away from a first, and this was obviously in the day that they didn't just bump you up. And I was so disheartened, and I went into my kind of interview to see if they would bump me up, and I was so nervous and lacked so much confidence that I completely fluffed it up. I cried. It was awful. My knowledge back then was first class. I know that it was. My lack of confidence completely screwed me over. So I decided that year, I took a year off, did personal training, worked in a job that was quite easy for me, and forced myself. I taught classes. I forced myself to interact with people at the customer service desk every day. I used to say, how was your day? What are you doing today? Things that just felt so super Americanized, super uncomfortable. And I forced myself to do it for a year. And then I kind of went and moved to Loughborough where I did my master's, and I didn't know anyone. And I thought, I've got 2 choices. I can be that person who cries in a classroom and fails their exams, or I can go and live my best life and study at the same time. And then met loads of friends, became super confident, got a distinction at Loughborough, which is infinitely harder than where I was doing my undergrad. And I was like, oh, if you just chill out and just try and be social and speak to people, actually your life gets a lot easier. And so I kind of just have to do that. I still have to do that now. I still have like pre-talk routines and stuff like that, because I think people think that it goes away one day. And I think you just get much better at saying, oh, I notice that I feel nervous, or I notice that I'm lacking confidence. Interesting. What am I going to do to manage that? As opposed to, I cannot ever feel this lack of confidence, because I just don't think that's feasible.
It's acting in spite of it, right? Like I remember very vividly when I did I said my undergrad like I did a master's, but when I went to university, on the first day I had about 3 or 4 friends, and that was part of my, like, outwardly up here very confident because I can generally talk to most people, but I'm that person, if I don't know anyone at a party, I'm hiding away in the corner. And I arrived at university, and I lost all my friends in like the queue. They got there early, and in the queue for the student union. And like, for anyone that doesn't know Freshers Week in the UK, you're never finding them again. Absolutely no chance. And I had to adapt. And I think that was one of the most defining moments of my confidence, because I have to speak to as many new people as humanly possible. And that taught me to get out of my comfort zone. That when I went to, PT, it was like, I'm going to do spin classes. I did aqua aerobics. I did stuff that I wouldn't even dream of doing now, just to sort of like, right, let's put myself out of my comfort zone as many times as possible. And I still struggle with it, but I do think that's is a massive impact on how I've got where I've got to now, and doing mentoring, public speaking, to a relatively small degree, but still doing it, which is a big where I was.
I think that's such a good point. I think that in order to get better at public speaking, you need to public speak. Yes, you probably do, but it's so transferable. It's going out on dates. It's meeting people and talking to people in the gym. It's all of that side of things. It all comes together, and it's so transferable amongst all. Yes, hone your skills at public speaking for sure, but if you're hiding away every single weekend and not socializing, and then thinking and go up to a big public speaking event on a Monday morning confident, you're wrong.
I remember when I was single, trying to build the confidence to speak to girls. And it was like, I'd start conversation with people in lifts. I'd start conversation with my hairdresser, with taxi drivers, and like just building up this ability to randomly start conversation with absolutely anyone, male, female, whatever, whatever your pronoun is. I started a conversation with and got to learn about people. And it's probably the reason why I started loving doing this sort of thing. And this is my passion project for years of wanting to do a podcast, is that ability, like, okay, I've got many friends in this podcast, or I've got people that I've met for the very first time, like this call here, where I've now just got to not only have a conversation, but be able to lead the conversation enough that someone comes off this call going, oh, I really enjoyed that hour or 90 minutes or whatever the time was. So I think that's a really important thing. And it's interesting you brought up imposter syndrome, because I don't know like if many other coaches feel this way, but certainly the ones I've worked with do, where I had this conversation on a podcast the other week, where I look at my client results different to how I view other coaches' client results. When I look at my client results, I go, that is them. That is all them. Congratulations to the client, as it should be. They put in the hard work. Now, I always think that in a client result, if it's a Harry Potter movie, they are Harry, I am Dumbledore. But if it's someone else's client another coach gets a result, I go, what did they do that's better than what I did? And I view it in a totally different thing. And it's amazing, like how that's 100% imposter syndrome. It's looking at, look at them as like, okay, I'm missing something in what I do, rather than actually looking at it from the client side of things.
That's interesting. I've never thought about that before, but I guarantee you that that's the norm. But nobody probably vocalizes it as eloquently as you just did. But I definitely think that that is probably a thing. I think it took me a long time to start owning the work that I did. But I'm the same as you. I'm very much like, this person did this work. I always just say, I'm just saying shoulder, kind of whispering you in your ear, pushing you along. That's how I like to frame it. But it's hard because, you know, you'll be the same. You get feedback all the time from clients or from people on social media. And for me, as a woman, that I've been working on is accepting compliments and not brushing them off and allowing other people to compliment you. I think is a really strong thing to be able to do. And we're so used to, I like your dress. Oh, I just got it. It's 5 years old. Or actually it's ripped at the back, or whatever it is. Or you look great, but oh, I'm actually really tired. And I think we get so used to that. And actually what you're doing when you do that is robbing someone else the joy of saying, do you know what? You look great today. I love complimenting other people. So why would I take the joy away from other people? So when people say whatever they may see on social media or as a class, I do try and own it as a thank you so much. I'm really glad that you would let me support you in this, but at the same time you still did all the work. So I think there's a nice little balancing act to have there.
Yeah, and I think that carries on quite nicely to the sort of the probably one of the main talking points I want to speak about, because there's a reel you did that sort of catalyst me dropping the message to jump on the show, and it's a real talk about empathy. And you mentioned a second ago about this is something that's very common, but something said so eloquently, and I thought this was really talked about the getting consumed by empathy. So for people that haven't watched this reel, go over a little bit about what it is that you were discussing in that, and what's your personal relationship with empathy as a coach first.
Yeah, so I think the reel I was talking about how unruly or kind of OTT empathy is not admirable. And I think a lot of us get into coaching as empathetic people and people who care about their clients. We give a lot to our clients. Anyone in a helping profession does that, and empathy is obviously really important. But what I see a lot of is people almost martyring themselves as coaches. Oh, I am the most empathetic. No, I'm the most empathetic. Oh, it's just so much work because I'm so empathetic. And that was me in the past. I would just like to say, so this is certainly not a criticism. I've definitely. But what I was trying to say with this reel is it's not admirable. And what you are doing when you say, I'm just so empathetic, and you get kind of what people call empathy burnout, which is more actually what we think well, I'll talk about that in a minute. And when people feel kind of burnt out by this over empathizing, it actually does your clients a disservice, because what you're doing is what we're doing is we're putting ourselves in the position of the other person, and we're kind of walking in their shoes, so to speak. So if a client checks in and they say, you know, I had to put my dog down this week, and actually my partner's really sick, and my child is going through the terrible twos, and my mum's really sick at the same time, and it can be very hard as a coach to find a kind of space where I can help you and I can understand without falling into, oh my God, that's so heavy, I'm so upset for you, and feeling really drained by it. But what happens when you do that is that you can't be objective for your client. You can't direct your client through what it is that they're going through, and you can't be what they ultimately need, which is someone to hold them accountable, and for someone to, yes, reframe some situations and nurture them, but move them forwards. And so I think we've just got a little bit of an issue with the industry with, you know, when I started working with people in terms of their relationship with food wasn't even a thing. Nobody really spoke about it. Whereas now, we've got thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people saying, I support you in your relationship with food. I'm so empathetic. And actually, I think it's dangerous waters to get in if you don't understand the difference between kind of empathy and compassion. And compassion is what we want to be focusing on, as opposed to getting lost in someone else's feelings.
I think as well, like when I see it all the time when coaches, often is when people fall into over empathizing. And you mentioned this in the reel of like, from a personal perspective, they end up feeling burnt out, overworked. They take the emotional stress of that client into the next client, and you see that sort of service drop overall. But you also find the results tend to struggle, because it's the same reason why people trying to coach their partners or their best friend always struggle, because they can't hold them accountable, because there's too much empathy there that they let them get away with things. And when you mention compassion, it's like, where is it that I'm compassionate because I want you to get to somewhere bigger, which is going to require me sometimes to pull you out of your comfort zone and into difficult situations for the bigger picture, and me almost letting you get away with stuff. Like sometimes that's needed, but quite often it's not.
Exactly. You're exactly right. I think you're right. There's the client side of it and the coach side of it. And when it comes to a client, if a client is going through a really tough time, they might struggle to say, I'm going to hold myself accountable to eating my fruit and vegetables, eating my protein, and getting to the gym. They need you to say, I know that it's really tough for you right now, but what's going to help you feel better is going to the gym. So I am going to set you a target of going to the gym 3 times this week, even though you feel like you don't want it. Compassion allows you to do that. It says, I understand how you feel, but this is what your future self is going to thank you for. It's the action. Empathy doesn't. Empathy says, God, I'm so sorry. That must be so tough. Just do what you can this week. And then what happens is a week later, when you've shown so much empathy and that kind of unstructured empathy, so to speak, a week later they say, oh, I did what I can. I did what I could. I'm still feeling pretty crappy, but I did what I could. And that was actually, I went for a walk once and that was it. Versus when you've shown compassion, they say, I dragged myself to the gym. I really didn't want to go, but I'm really glad that I did because I actually feel better. And that's the difference between when you get better results physically, mentally. And one of them, you've not done it's not really necessarily done direct harm, but you've not done your job as a coach to move them forwards. And at the same time, like you said, you're also exhausted. You're also worried about them. You're also taking that worry into your next client. So your next client's results might not be as great because you've not shown up for them 100% like you could have done had you kind of been a little bit more compassionate and less empathetic.
It's setting expectations for somebody as well, right? Maybe this is slightly different in the clients that you have that are more want to become more mindful with their food, and it's a more bigger picture, a very holistic approach. But I see it all the time in coach where they do this over empathy, but they don't set this expectation of, okay, if we're going to do X and Y, Z less, or we're going to put more days up at maintenance calories of their goals to be in dieting phase, and they don't explain, hey, do you know this is fine if you're okay with this, but this will slow the rate of loss. Are you okay with that? If so, I'm good. They don't have that conversation because it's tough to have that conversation. The client then gets, why am I not losing weight? Well, it's because we said it was fine not to do any of the things that you held you accountable for. And I think when we transition into what caused disordered eating patterns, I think that poor expectation management is these things where clients end up very frustrated of they're sort of half doing stuff, not getting the results, and then they end up in this almost food focus because nothing's working for them. They're dieting, they're bored of dieting, they're not getting results, they're sort of in and out binge restrict cycles. Whereas if they know, okay, if I do this, if I pull back on this, okay, that's fine, that's okay. But just as long as you're okay with this is the way things are going to go. And I think that's lacking, that people struggle to have those tough conversations. Maybe that's another empathy thing, I suppose.
I think that's a bit of an empathy thing, but I also think it's a generational thing of us not to have tough conversations. Now, I'm not going to get into kind of cancel culture and all that stuff, but Gen Z, I am a millennial, so I'm an elder millennial, but I'm a millennial nonetheless, right?
What class is a millennial? Sorry to cut you off, but where does the cutoff between millennial and Gen Z?
I think it's something like 80s, like early 80s. Oh, right, late. I don't know what the difference is between like late millennials and Gen Z.
If I'm 1990, am I a millennial?
I think you're a millennial. Just
okay, cool.
I think.
Yeah.
I think.
The race that's ruining the world and blamed for everything. Well, I'll take that.
Yeah. But we have been brought up being great at difficult conversations because we all just want to be liked. And Gen Z, I think, is even potentially more mollycoddled in that way to some degree, where we're not used to having to have difficult conversations because we're just not used to it. So when it comes to coaching, it's uncomfortable because we don't want to be disliked and we don't want to, we just want to be accepted and liked by everyone. But as a coach, that's not always going to be the case. And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head when you're saying you have to manage expectations, and it's not you saying you can't do X, Y, or Z. It's not you that is kind of can't be accepted here. It's that you saying, this is the fact. If we reduce your deficit, fat loss is going to be slower. That's just a fact, and that's fine. But the whole point is, this is what you want. And as a coach, as long as you're always working in line with what the client wants and the client's values, then you can't really go wrong. Like you said, okay, so you have an option. We can reduce your deficit and it will go slower, or we can go faster and you will be hungrier. I don't mind what you do. This is your journey. This is up to you. I will support either based on what is important to you. And then that way, when it works or it doesn't work, you can say, okay, this is why it's not worked. Do you want to reassess? Again, no one has failed. It's like, this is the option that you chose and it didn't quite work, so let's do something else. And then it stops the coach also from internalizing it, or didn't do the right job. No, because you gave them the option and you were honest, you set expectations, you were transparent, and then they made a decision that was right for them.
Do you find, because you said you've had a lot of clients that come from other coaches where they've potentially used very aggressive dieting approaches and they've come to you for having a better relationship with food. Like, we're very, and sometimes rightly so, very quick to slam the previous coach. But do you think there's an element of there is, they are struggling to have those difficult conversations, so that they're not necessarily knowing what the client's values are, or the client's not communicating things with them? So they sort of like, where the trainer thinks they are, where the client thinks they are very, very different. Like, do you see that a lot with those kind of clients, or are they completely different when they come to you?
But I think all of the above. I rarely will slam another coach. I think it's because there are three truths, right? Coach's truth, client's truth, and the actual truth. And so if someone comes to me and says they had me on 900 calories and they had me doing this much and X, Y, and Z, did the coach have them on 900 calories because actually they knew they were eating 500 calories a day over every day, and that was just their kind of way of not manipulating them, but allowing them to feel like they're getting progress? And like, was that actually the truth? Or was it that they were genuinely saying, eat 900 calories a day and don't deviate from that ever? We are never going to know as a new coach what really happened. The more you get to work with someone, the more you start to see their personality types, and actually you can probably make a fair guess about what happened last time. I think the problem is that you're right, that maybe previous coaches haven't done the work on what is that person's values and meeting them where they are, but then I do think that coach has failed them, because that is their job. And I think if a coach isn't able to do that, then they're not doing enough of their own personal development to be the best coach for that for them. And so I do think they failed them, but not in an aggressive sense or an intentional sense, just in the sense I wish that we would all reflect on ourselves, myself included, and say, this is the gap that I have, and this is what I need to do more of. Where I do slam coaches, and where I have probably put a reel out before about this, where I get a lot of clients who have regained the weight that they've lost with other coaches, is that a lot of the time these coaches knew what they were doing. And I know some of the coaches, and again, I don't have a personal opinion about certain coaches because you never really know, but I know that these clients were overeating through a diet and had a coach, and they continued to push them. I know that these clients lost their period when they were dieting and the coach continued to push them. I know these things. And then where I get the kind of cherry on the top is when I'm working with that client and then that old coach uses their transformation picture to make money. And that frustrates me, because I think I know the kind of headspace that person was in at the end of that journey. You're making money off what you did to their headspace, or what happened, not what you did, what happened to their headspace when they went through that journey with you. And I'm sat here quietly because they don't want anyone to know that they're working with me, because they're working on their relationship with food, and a lot of them are personal trainers and they feel ashamed of that, which they certainly shouldn't. And it's when it kind of is a tough pill for me to swallow and stay quiet about, because it's frustrating for me to see that.
Yeah, I remember vividly, not even an old story, but I worked with someone a number of years ago where we managed to bring his food up and quite considerably, and got him considerably leaner, stronger, feeling healthier. And he finished his program, felt good on his own, went away, and then he decided, when a certain personal trainer came to his town, he went, okay, I'm going to go and work one-to-one with these guys. I worked with him, and within the last year, like 7 or 8 months ago, maybe now, like 5-6 months ago, came back to me, and I'm like, how are you now on like 1,200 calories low carb for the last year? How is now that I'm looking at blood work and your thyroid's in the pan? Like, how have we gotten to this stage so quickly. And now my job is almost sort of like trying to pull him away from 25,000 steps a day, 6 days a week of cardio, trying to say like, I got a message today going, I can't believe my thyroid numbers are getting better with more carbs. Yeah, of course they are. It's the low thyroid, it's the low carbs that have probably pushed this into the ground in the first place. And this is the thing that like frustrates me, is when someone was in a good spot and you see in a very short period of time the damage this can be done with someone that doesn't pay attention to these signals and these signs. Now I know I worked a lot on my service to make sure I have as much of an open line of communication as I possibly can to make sure I don't miss things. In my early part of my career, I may have done, and I've had a few issues. And I never want to be in that position again, where I have a guy that has an issue with testosterone or thyroid or something from just being absolutely slammed into the wall. From a client side of empathy, though, where do you think there's a line of where's too much? Because I know some coaches get great results in their meshing every day and they're always with a client. I know from my personal perspective, like I would hate that. And every time I open an app and like if I'm tracking my food, that's accountability. Every time I speak to them is accountability. Every time I do a check-in, that's accountability. How much personal time do you need before it just becomes you're almost creating that level of pressure because you're almost breathing down the neck? Is there a line or is it super individual?
It's a great question. I think it probably is super individual. However, the way that I work with clients is, there are a couple of options to have that type of intense contact or not, because it is individual. I have had this conversation with a couple of coaches who there's a sort of like scheme of work with certain mentors that get coaches to like check in with their clients every single day and have accountability types of check-ins every day. And for me, I don't think that's beneficial because I feel like it strips someone of their autonomy. And maybe initially, when we're moving from that kind of, when we're trying to create more autonomy in someone, that might be okay initially, it might be helpful initially, but over time, I don't want someone to have to need me to check in with them every single day to make sure they're doing what they're doing. If someone is sure of their values, which I think every coach should be doing when they start working with someone, and they know why they're doing something. Yes, it's hard to stick to certain things, but what I want my clients to do is to come back every morning to say, this is my intention for the day and this is how it aligns with what's important to me. That's how we create sustainable behavior change. That's how I know that when they finish working with me, they wake up every day continuously 5 years down the line and say, this is my intention for today, this is what's important to me, even if that's changed in the last 5 years since they did work with me. Whereas if you've got someone who is consistently breathing down your neck, as soon as that stops, what happens? Like, I don't want someone to be reliant on me for the rest of their life. I've got clients that have worked with me for 4 years, 5 years. It's not because they're reliant on me, it's because they get some accountability and we have great banter. And that's the extent of it. I know that if they stopped, they would be fine, but they just don't have my banter, so they don't.
It's exactly how I feel. I've always said that, I know a coach. I'll shout him out because I think he does a very good job. A guy called Nathan Johnson runs Autonomy, and he literally boots clients out 6 months after diet because his whole point is I create autonomy and you can go about this by yourself and you've succeeded. Now I don't quite go that level of approach, but I want to get to a point where my clients don't stay with me because they need to stay coaching with me. They stay coaching with me because they want to. Not only from their perspective, because they can maintain their body weight and have a better relationship with their food and their data. They can move in and diet if they need to. They can pull back out without guilt or anything like this. But it's also more fun from a coaching perspective, where it's like, cool, where do we go now? Do you want a big deadlift? Do you want to do this? Where it's rather than like it's 3 years down the line, I'm still going, how many calories? I don't know. You don't want that point where it has to be so reliant, because you just feel like you're babysitting someone and no adult wants to feel that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of my clients don't track their macros either. And I think this is a problem that, again, we have people who worry that if they're not doing those things, then they're not supporting their clients properly. But if you can't coach your client without tracking numbers, and I'm talking scale, weight and macros, then you're not necessarily coaching them optimally, because like you said, so many times I've had conversations with clients who've been with me for a long time, and I say, new year or something where there's a big change, and we say, right, let's review everything. What's your focus? And they say, I want to put more time into socializing. I want to put more time into my career. And that's actually the focus of our coaching for a while, because that's what's important to them. And again, it could be 3 months of just helping them with their business, especially if they're PTs. It turns into more mentoring for a while. But like you said, maybe nutrition is still there. I'm like, have you eaten your fruit and vegetables? Okay, great. And that's the kind of the extent of it. But at no point, again, is it at no point should a client after that amount of time feel that they need to check in with you. But like you said, they want to do that.
Yeah. So going into sort of dietary approaches, obviously a lot of what you do is helping people be more mindful and become more intuitive, especially people that have come off competitive stages and have been the tiny Tupperware boxes. I've seen people eating out of supplement boxes and things like this, like coming out of that level. What's your approach now? Like obviously the big talk over the last couple of years has been the calories on menus, good things or bad things. When it comes to dieting approaches now, are you quite flexible in your approach dependent on the goal, or is there certain ways that you tend to go about things?
I'm super flexible to a degree. Things that I won't do are rigid dietary approaches and structured meal plans. Although that being said, there might be like a week now and again where I say, let's follow this meal plan just to see what's going on, to maybe support adherence. So I'm definitely not black and white with things at all. And I'm not anti-diet and I'm not pro-diet. I'm very much, is dieting healthful for you? That's the first thing. And even if it's not, is the aesthetic goal, the cost of that worth, or the pros of that, worth all the costs that may come with it, or the cons that may come with it. But no, genuinely, I think people massively overcomplicate it. Get yourself in a deficit and eat enough protein and be imperfect with it. We're aiming for an average, and I'll look at people's average calorie intake across the week if they're tracking. I don't really care too much how they did it, if they did a lower calorie day and a higher calorie day and averaged out, as long as it was a choice and not a binge restrict situation. Because as you know, a binge restrict cycle and a kind of proactive banking of calories for the weekend, lower during the week, higher during the weekend, on paper can both look exactly the same, but in the mindset space can be very different. So I think that's really important. But then also I'll have lots of clients who don't track, and I think I have clients who work on their relationship with food and then go into a fat loss phase, and for them tracking is either they just don't want to do it, or it's triggering for them, or they don't want to do it and they lose fat just by eating a little bit less. And it's really not that complicated. I think we overcomplicate it so much. I'd much rather you focus on, like, in a nutshell, your nutrition is all of the same healthful habits 365 days a year, right? Which might include rest days, it might include, whatever. All of the habits are the same. The only difference between dieting or gaining weight or maintaining is your calorie intake, which just doesn't have to be overthought. Your protein stays the same. Everything can pretty much stay the same. Just eat a little bit less or eat a little bit more. As awful as that sounds to say, eat less, move more. I don't like that narrative necessarily, but I just think we as a whole massively overcomplicate and think that we have to change things to lose a little bit of weight. And it's like, you really don't. Just reduce the fat that you have in your meals. And it can be as simple as that.
It's so we obviously, you see, you have clients, some clients track macros and some clients don't. Is this, when you're looking at a client that potentially would track their food, is this based off preference, or is it something that where you would encourage people to track from an initial basis? Because a lot of people, I'm sure, come to you if they're complete beginners, non-ex-competitors, that going into an intuitive eating approach, let's say, their intuitive side of eating has got them to where they are currently at, and they might not have any awareness of food, no structure, no routine. It's a little bit all over the place. Would you encourage those people to maybe track their intake for a while, or maybe have some level of structure? You mentioned meal plans, not used very often. Or would you then look to still just make these people more mindful of eating? I suppose it's a combination of the two.
Probably a combination. I certainly used to think in the olden days of coaching that everyone should track at least initially to get understanding of food and then do something different. I don't think that anymore. I think that people who come to me and maybe have never tracked before and they don't have a desire to track, I will definitely provide some structure, but I'll pretty much provide structure for almost everyone I work with, regardless of the goal. And that will be things like eating regularly, eating protein 3 or 4 times a day, eating fruit and vegetables, all the basic nutritional guidelines, drinking water with your meals, minimal snacking, etc. That is sometimes sufficient alongside some mindfulness work around, because that can help reduce calorie intake through snacking and things like that. Although it doesn't directly impact fat loss, it can certainly help just be more mindful around food. So along with that work, and along with some initial nutrition education around this is what protein is, so carbohydrates are, etc., that can be sufficient, especially if you've got more body fat to lose. If you're in a larger body, you can do something like that, start exercising regularly, increase your physical activity, and lose X% of your body weight consistently over a couple of months. And then what you tend to find is maybe things start to stall a little bit because you've done all the simple swaps, you've got into your routine, you get more efficient. And then at that point, I might say, okay, now would probably be a good time to track. Your relationship with food now is really good. You've got all of these healthful habits. So let's there add in a little bit of tracking to see that consistent fat loss. And I think in the past, I definitely went, let's track first and then maybe change it. And actually now I do a lot more of, let's get all of these habits in place and more healthful nutrition first, and then go into tracking, because you don't need the kind of nitty gritty education to make basic healthful swaps and to see the results of that.
Just because I agree with this. I just want to play devil's advocate for the sake of playing devil's advocate here. Because one of the things that why a lot of coaches might be saying, listen to this, or a lot of clients that struggle with losing weight thinking they're only eating 1,500 calories. Like, did you ever see the show Secret Eaters on Channel 4?
Yes.
Yeah, like
it's so shameful, but I did love it at the time when I was young.
I in a way, I still kind of love it, because I do think there's that element of this lack of attention to detail, lack of awareness with food, where people think, oh, I'm only eating 1,400 calories. And like we mentioned earlier, the coaches do this to counterintuitive with that they're eating 2, 3, 4 times as much. I remember a client that was like struggling to lose weight for ages, and every week I was like, hey, can you just send some picture of your meals? Like, you're a 120 kilo guy, you're on about 1,900 calories. This doesn't make sense. So I just want to make sure there's nothing obvious in here. We worked out he had 1,000 calories of sauce. So he was eating the structured meals that we were saying and then putting like literally 1,000 calories of sauce over his meals. And like with those things, we can work on the basics in terms of those habits. But if those oversights aren't looked at, would that potentially have an issue where you potentially lose buy-in because a client's like, well, I'm not getting anything out of this. There's nothing you've done wrong. You've had a great approach to them. You've worked on all the basics, but that basics is covered in grease and oil and sauce and lattes and all these other things. Like, how do you work with clients that maybe haven't got that awareness to either allow them to start having that education process, or be more open to have that conversation with you? Because some people might not even want to speak about the things that they're their favorite foods.
Yeah, it's a great question, right? And I think if your client is here to get fat loss and they're not dropping body fat, then you're not doing something right. So of course, I think if a client was making all these healthful changes and they still weren't losing body fat, you can't ignore that. You still have to think, right, there's something going wrong here. What I would say is, when you're working on food education, aside from tracking, people tend to just naturally become more mindful of what they're having in their food and of their calorie intake. So when they go to the shop, they might sort of think, oh, well, I'm trying to eat healthy, which is the healthier option. And healthy is a kind of questionable word, but they probably will look at things like calories and fat intake and stuff, even though they're not actively tracking over time, just because they are more aware now of calories in general because they're trying to drop body fat. But that doesn't necessarily have to come through. It can just be more educated choices. And if you look at the intuitive eating paradigm, it does involve food education, and it does involve kind of learning about foods and calories in foods as a whole, i.e. 1 gram of fat has 9 calories, that type of vibe, without actually tracking. So I think there's such a middle ground. If it's somebody like that, then I might say, okay, let's track for 2 days this week. Let's just see. And that can be sufficient to go, oh, actually my calories are higher than I thought. And then that's the end of it. Okay, we can see now it came from your sauces. Let's reduce those and then let's try again. And that might then say, actually, I quite enjoy tracking. Let's keep up. Great. Or they might not. And I think on the kind of flip side of this, I definitely think there's a pushback from people saying, I don't want to track, but I want to lose body fat. What should I do? And at some point, I think it's helpful to say, especially if you're in a smaller body, it's helpful to say, well, do you want fat loss enough to put that effort in? Because sometimes it's a case of just not wanting to do it. And that's fine if you don't want to do it. I'm not really one to push fat loss if you won't benefit from it for your health. But you have to, when you choose something, you choose not to do something else. And everything comes with a little bit of sacrifice, and that sacrifice might be tracking your food if you are in a smaller body and want to get leaner. So I think it kind of works on both sides. I think some people use it as I don't want to track because it's too much effort, but then also on the other side, a lot of people don't need to track in order to see results.
There's a couple of really key points I want to come back to on that. And one of the things it was big is about this awareness thing of like almost empowering people and educating people to make the decision one way or the other, with neither having a inherent bad or guilt level of consequence. I've always talked to my clients like the Snickers bar analogy. So like, if I say to you, if I put you on a low carb plan and say, Emilia, you can't have a Snickers bar, the first thing you're going to want is a Snickers bar. You're going to go out to your friends and go, Simon told me I can't have a Snickers bar. And this is always already this guilt and this dread about this coaching process. And that's where the stereotype of, don't tell my personal trainer about that sort of analogy comes from. Whereas I would much rather say, do you know what? Okay, your Snickers bar is 390 calories. So you can fit your Snickers bar into your allowances, but understand you might be a little bit hungrier because we take food volume down. And as you said, sacrifices is part of this. And if you go, do you know what? I really want it, and I don't mind being a bit hungry, and I can sit with it. Like, fine, no, be my guest. But you might look at that yourself and go, do you know what? It's not worth it. And it's not. I never have to be the bad guy in that situation. This is totally your call. But this or that, like, take your pick. There's a sacrifice with either, but it depends which you prefer, which I think is a much better approach than these black and white sort of blanket rules.
For sure. Black and white blanket rules, it just come from lazy coaching or lazy information, and it doesn't help anyone.
So when you going into the topic of perfectionism, this is something I want to sort of like bring up again from what you were saying, that when somebody sort of like isn't open, isn't like not honest, or they feel that there's a guilt associated with food, this perfectionism mindset of like, I don't want to tell my coach about this, or I'm going to hide from, whether it's from you or from themselves. We can only help what we know about, right? So how would you encourage people who have maybe clients that just stay under the radar and stay quiet when things are obviously struggling and obviously not going wrong, and people want to help them, but they're just not coming for you? What advice would you give to someone, to whether it's the coach creating a better environment, or to advise to someone who's maybe like this, that sort of wants to hide from the things they're not good at or aren't perfect?
Yeah, I think with coaches, it starts with you. And there's this kind of idea with person-centered coaching or therapy or counseling, where a therapist has to, Carl Rogers stipulates there has to be 3 conditions in order for a kind of person-centered relationship to take place and for someone to be able to change. And that is empathy, unconditional positive regard, and the third one is congruence. And that means really, as a counselor, therapist, or coach, being completely yourself, aligning with your values, knowing your values, and being kind of who you are. Because when you do that, you allow the person you're working with to do the same, and to be honest and to be comfortable with who they are. And if you are somebody who is super, like, has a strong ego, puts out a certain face on Instagram and social media, and your marketing is quite judgmental, isn't very authentic or honest, that is the vibe you set for your clients. Often we think of social media as an outreach or marketing or meeting different people, but I think about my social media as my clients watching. They need to know me. I set the precedent for how I want my clients to show up. And that means going on social media without wearing makeup. That means going on social media and saying, I ballsed up and I ate this. It means going on social media and saying I'm eating a lot of salad, or I'm eating a pizza, whatever it is. I set the precedent for what my clients think is quote unquote okay. And I think that's one of the most important things. And I'm talking about social media, but it's the same as if you have a Facebook group community, if you have an in-person situation. If you're personal training in person, it's not a session for you to talk about yourself. But if a client opens up to you a little bit and is vulnerable, it's the same as when you're dating. You want to be vulnerable back. You want to show that you can create that space of, they've been a little bit honest about themselves, I'm going to be a little bit honest about myself, in order to let them feel comfortable, so that then they can do that again. And that's not oversharing. That's just being congruent and authentic. And I think that's the most important thing that you can do in order to create a safe space for your clients, at the same time as doing the obvious things of not judging them when they do say something, allowing them to, like, being there to reframe. I think one of our most important jobs as a coaches is reframing. And, you know, if a client's checking in and they're saying that they've done something quote unquote bad, or they've messed up somehow, reframing it as, okay, well, this happened, that was a bit of a slip. What was the situation? What can we learn from it? And what will we do next time? Amazing. So that client then checks in with something that they feel is negative, and what they get back is a really positive reframing and a lesson learned from that, so that next time it happens, they can say, oh, I wonder what her lesson's going to be for the next time. And I want to tell her that I've messed up, so that she can reframe it and then tell me something like how we can tackle it together next time. And so I think framing these failures or slips as positives, even as a person, as a client, failures are good, slips are good, because they are positive experiences for growth. If you never fail, I know it's a cliche, but if you never fail, you're not progressing, you're not growing. It's impossible not to fail on things. And with my coaches that I work with on the ETPHD method, I encourage them to mess up. And when they come to me and say, or if a client comes to me and says, oh, this happened, and we speak to the coach and say, oh, I can't believe I messed up, it's like, great, well, you're learning in this process and we're not going to do it again. And I think we all just have to be a lot more comfortable, client coaches, at failing and saying it's a completely normal human experience and learning from it.
I couldn't agree more. Before I go on to what I was going to say on that point and following up from your point, I always think it's amazing. In 70 odd episodes, every podcast I've ever done has come full circle. It's amazing. You mentioned we talk about your first dates at the start, and we come back to dating as a diet analogy at the end. Always in full circle. But I think like reframing is, I was having this conversation today, and I was like, client was like not communicating when things were off plan. I'll get a few days, I understand what's going on, we're having this communication, something on the weekend, poof, silence. And I'm just like, you know, like if what I've given you is too restrictive and you're struggling with it, if you let me know and we look at the data and I go, oh, you still drop in, we can manage your hunger, I can add food here, what are you missing? We can do something about it. And we could have found out this diet that really works for you, but I can't help what I don't know. And I was like, Reframing says, I'm not going to tell you off. It's like, if you know, I can make this easier for you. I can make this better. And if you have gone over on your food on the weekend, yeah, you might slow down fat loss, but you could gain a bit of muscle from being in a bit of a surplus for a couple of days. You can improve thyroid output. It's not a bad thing. Like, people think deficit good, surplus bad. And no, like, years are cyclical. We need to be in a semblance of both over the course of the year.
Absolutely. And I also think reminding people that it's your goal. I don't mind what goals my clients have as long as it's helpful for them. And I don't mind if they 2 weeks down the line say, thought I wanted fat loss, but you know what? I really would rather go out partying every weekend and just live my best life and be healthful. I don't mind if someone turns around and says, actually, I failed it and I chose to fail because I actually don't want this anymore. I really don't mind. And I don't mind even if you didn't choose to do it, but you slipped up for a month in a row. It doesn't impact what I think of you. It impacts how I then can support you. I think sometimes a lot of time people think that they don't want to let the person down that they're working with. And it's not about that. We're not here to judge whether you've had a good or a bad week. We're here to look at, oh, look, you say you want fat loss and your scale weight's come down. Well done. You're moving in the direction of what you want. I will never compliment someone's fat loss ever. But if they want fat loss and they're losing scale weight, I'll say, great, thanks to all of the goals that you hit, all the process-based goals that you hit in your habits, you've lost weight, well done. That's not me saying I want that for you. It's me saying I'm really happy that you've moved in the way that you want to move. So I think remembering that too is so important.
Yeah, I absolutely couldn't agree more there. I guess on a final point, because I know you've got your round, I don't want to take up too much of your time. So one of the, a lot of people coming in to see you or dieting in general were you familiar with a period of time of restriction. So meal plans, macros, whatever approach they decide to use to get to from where they are to end goal. But most of the people that I certainly deal with, and I presume you certainly deal with as well, are not lifelong competitors. They're not wannabe IFBB pros. They are people who have got lives and business and social occasions. Like, my parents grew up in pubs. I can't think of nothing worse than tracking every macro for the rest of my life. How do you get people to start moving away from MyFitnessPal and tracking their calories once they've hit their goal? I know you've mentioned that maybe you don't even use it during, but if they've used it throughout that period of time and they want to move away from it, how do we start to build that process?
I think everyone again is different in this. For some people, once they finish, I think it's important once you finish a diet, I think it's important to come back to your maintenance calories and find maintenance that works for you for a little while whilst you're tracking. Usually I think that's helpful. Not always. And I've had competitors in the past when I used to prep competitors who competed, some of them I just took tracking straight away off. They gained a few kilos and then that was it, because it stopped them overeating after a show. So this is certainly not for everyone, but I think for most people, it usually benefits them to go back to maintenance. And then I honestly think of, for most people, removing it physically. So saying, right, we're going to just actually, maybe you've had a carbohydrate, protein and fat target and calories. Let's remove your fat and carbohydrate target and you're going to hit protein and calories. And then we're going to say, right, your calorie target is 2000. For the next week, you're going to hit anywhere between 1800 and 2200. And then the next week, it's going to be between 1600 and 2400. Okay, you're literally having this big, huge variation now. You know what food looks like. We either take away a day of tracking, as long as it doesn't become a kind of quote unquote cheat day or a binge type day. We could try and take a day, or we can say maybe you've got a family. So we're going to track 1000 calories up until the afternoon, or 1500 calories until the afternoon. And then you're going to enjoy an evening meal and supper with your family every day. And then so you've kind of got that half and half day, and I think it depends on the person's values. So if someone says, family is the most important value to me, okay, well, how can we make this removal of tracking align with your values about socializing, dinner times with your kids, etc.? That's why that's really important to you. So let's make your nutrition align with that. And for other people, it might be, I really value romantic relationships, but I'm single. Okay, so your goal is going to be, we're going to actively say, I've had clients say this before, we say, right, you're going to spend 10 minutes on Tinder every night, things like that. You're going to do that, and then you're not going to be tracking at weekends because you're going to go out and date at the weekends, and you're just going to track during the week. And so it's about bringing it out physically for most people. Again, not all people. Some people can find it fine just to whip it out, but having some sort of structure. But at the same time, I'm able to focus on something else, because remember that, yes, tracking has allowed us to get fat loss, but for a lot of people, that tracking has also provided a sense of purpose, a sense of self-efficacy, a sense of control, a focus. And for a lot of people who fall into dieting, they're doing that for a reason, and it might be because they don't necessarily have that somewhere else. And so it's about, let's bring that thing down. But at the same time, where can we create some purpose, some joy, some focus elsewhere? And so it's kind of balancing them out.
It's really interesting you say that, because it's almost that gold medal syndrome when someone comes on a diet. And I know I felt it coming off like photo shoot preps and things like this, and getting really, really lean. Like everything is geared to this day. Every food I have, every cardio, every training session. And then you have it and you get these great photos you can have forever. And then Monday comes and it's exactly the same as Friday, but now without any of that purpose. And that desire to track and to diet and to stick to those habits that got you to this goal, now that deadline is not there, it's non-existent, becomes infinitely more harder. And you mentioned bringing people back to maintenance, and I always thought about this in maintenance. There's the two schools of thought, and I already know your take on this, because you alluded to earlier and you've mentioned it on social media. You get this slowly but steady increase their calories up because you think it's all down regulate, thyroid, needs, etc., etc. Or we go the Eric Helms popularized approach of recovery diet, bang, maintenance calories, gain a bit of body fat, that's fine. And I generally think that if someone has a good awareness with food and they've built this over the time that they're dieting, taking someone to maintenance straight away is absolutely no problem at all. And I don't think for most people it'll have any negative side effects at all. I think the only reason why you would maybe go a little bit slower, in my take, is if you think someone is so tied to that deadline that if you go, well, here's an extra 1000 calories, they're not going to fill it with good food, voluminous food, stuff that's going to stop those being restrict side, because they're going, wow, I've got 1000 calories, I can go nuts, and it becomes 3000. Do you have different approaches to reverse dieting, or is it generally like, I want to make a big jump out because I want to get them out of dieting as quickly as possible?
So my standard is, let's get them out of dieting as possible to maintenance. However, the type of clients I work with generally feel a little bit reserved around that. So psychologically, I might say we're going to do 100 or 2 calories just below maintenance. As long as I can say just below maintenance, that's fine. But again, other clients who have maybe been overeaters in the past, we actually go into a bit of a surplus straight away. because they know that their hunger is high, they know that their leptin levels are low, they know their ghrelin is high, they know that their expenditure has still been so high that we're just trying to mitigate any overeating. And I think that's the classic mistake that most people make, is that they prolong thing, and they kind of bring it up slowly to try and justify their overeating, or to try and counteract the fact that they're overeating, when really if they just bring their calories straight up to maintenance or a slight surplus, they're not going to be overeating, and they'll still be eating less calories. So I do have a bit of a variation with people. I think it's really important to stipulate, regardless, and I'll say to all of my clients at the end of a diet, your main goal for this week or the next few weeks is to eat the same food you've been eating when you were dieting, but you're going to increase the volume of those foods. And if in the past, when it was competitors, I would say I would make much more of a bigger deal of this, because most of the time with my clients now, they don't really have certain foods that they eat all the time, but they tend to eat similar sort of breakfasts and lunches or whatever. So we can increase the volume there. But this was especially important with competitors, because, you know, they tend to obviously have certain foods that they've not had at all, and they start to fantasize about them. And I say, right, you're not going to bring those foods in yet. You can like have a meal after your show, but then you're going to eat the same foods as you were eating 2 weeks ago, but double the size. And I think that conversation is really, really important. Then we can start bringing in some more foods. But again, everyone is different, as you know.
Yeah. And I could go on about reverse time for ages, but I realized we've just gone over the hour, and you've got stuff to do. So I realized that we went so much into the first date conversation at the start. We didn't actually get a proper introduction to who you are. So before we talk about where to find you, if someone's listened to this at this point and they're going, man, this girl's really, really smart, tell us a little about what you do and who you help and who you are essentially.
Sure. So I am a registered nutritionist, and I work predominantly with people who are trying to improve their relationships with food and their body image in some way, shape, or form, usually from chronic dieting backgrounds, but not always. And I run a coaching team who use my methods to support people all over to do that. And I also run EIQ Nutrition with Emma Story-Gordon, which is an online nutrition course that is evidence-based, but it's got a huge compassionate undertone. So it's quite a holistic nutrition course to support personal trainers and being able to support their clients beyond just fat loss, beyond just tracking like we were talking about.
And where can people find you, the course and everything else?
Best place is Instagram, Emilia Thompson PHD, or EIQ_nutrition. That's where I'm most kind of prevalent.
Well, thank you very much for your time. This is really, really enjoyable. I even prepared for speaking to a Scott my sugar-free iron brew ready, and I didn't even open it.
Oh.
Clearly a good conversation. But thank you very much for your time. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.